Greetings to all. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic for the lecture is Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. In this lecture, we shall explain the significance of US President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. While talking about the 14 points, the lecture shall also discuss the causes of the First World War, the entry of United States in First World War, and important aspects pertaining to Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. In this lecture, we shall also highlight how Woodrow Wilson's 14 points not only laid the foundation for the basis for the Treaty of Versailles, but also are very important when we look at global governance issues. To begin with, Woodrow Wilson was 20th President of the United States. Most important, Woodrow Wilson was President of United States during First World War. In that context, it is important to underline Woodrow Wilson played an important role with respect to formation of League of Nations after the First World War. There have been important programs and laws that have been presented by Woodrow Wilson during his presidency. To name a few, reading from US government archives, Federal Reserve System. And this system is still in place today, and it helps to regulate the economy by controlling the money supply. Federal Trade Commission also was an important program by US President Woodrow Wilson. In the very important speech to the United States Congress, and we're talking about January 1918, President Woodrow Wilson presented an important insight, that is, it is significant to understand, and this insight is very important. As we say, it is important to understand because it presented the vision for an idealistic post-war European society. Before we dwell further in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, let us understand the causes of the First World War. The major causes of the First World War, namely militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and the assassination. To add to that, the political, territorial, economic competition, militarism, and above all, the complex web of alliances and alignments have been discussed in various historical textbooks, in various debates on political science and world history as the causes of First World War. The First World War, as we are talking about, we must understand that it was also known as the Great War. The First World War began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. When we try to understand the course of the First World War, when the First World War broke out across Europe in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed that United States would remain neutral. Now, it is very important to understand that this neutrality was given up with time. And what was that? What was the immediate cause of United States entry into the First World War? And if we go by historical narrative, April 1917. The defense of United States maritime interests was one of the immediate causes of United States entry into First World War. The United States officially entered the conflict on 6th April 1917. Once again, going by various inputs that we have got from historical textbooks. The German announcement of the unrestricted submarine warfare and the subsequent sinking of ships with US citizens on board. And to add here the important event, Germany's sinking of the British ocean liner Lusitania on 9th May 1915, which killed more than 120 US citizens and provoked outrage in the United States. President Wilson declared that United States' objective was to vindicate the principles of peace and justice in the life of the world. President Wilson asked Congress for a war to end all wars that would make the world safe for democracy. Now, as we look into President Wilson's 14 points, it is very important to correlate with the earlier speeches presented by President Wilson. Once again, going by various inputs that we have got from us.gov, that is, in the several speeches also, President Wilson in that year presented an important idea, that is just and secure peace, and not merely a new balance of power. He appointed a committee of experts known as the Inquiry to help them refine his ideas for peace. In December 1917, he asked the Inquiry to draw up specific recommendations for a comprehensive peace settlement. And now it is important to understand that this formed the basis of program of 14 points to a joint session of Congress on 8 January 1918. The address, which was praised in United States and allied nation, and most important, once again going from history.state.gov inputs, the then Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin too looked upon it as a landmark of enlightenment in international relations. Woodrow Wilson used the 14 points as the basis for negotiating the Treaty of Versailles that ended the war. Let us now read through the text of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, January 8, 1918. We've got some important inputs from the various works that have been there pertaining to life of Woodrow Wilson, pertaining to important documents from the US Congress. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, reading from there. It will be our wish and purpose that the processes of peace, when they are begun, shall be absolutely open, and that they shall involve and permit henceforth no secret understandings of any kind. Reading further from Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, the day of conquest and aggrandizement is gone by. So is also the day of secret covenants entered into in the interest of particular governments, and likely at some unlooked for moment to upset the peace of the world. Reading further Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, we entered this war because violations of right had occurred, which touched us to the quick and made the life of our own people impossible, unless they were corrected and the world secured once for all against their recurrence. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. It is that the world be made fit and safe to live in, and particularly that it be made safe for every peace-loving nation, which like our own, wishes to live its own life, determine its own institutions, be assured of justice and fair dealing by other peoples of the world as against force and selfish aggregation. Reading further, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, in regard to these essential rectifications of wrong and assertions of right, we feel ourselves to be intimate partners of all governments and peoples associated together against the imperialist. Further, we cannot be separated in interest or divided in purpose. We stand together until the end. Reading further, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. For such arrangements and covenants, we are willing to fight and to continue to fight until they are achieved, but only because we wish the right to prevail and desire a just and stable peace as can be sorted only by removing the chief provocations to war. Further, in Woodrow Wilson's address with reference to 14 points, there has a very important reference to Germany also. In Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, it is pointed out that we have no jealousy of German greatness. We wish her only to accept her place of equality among the peoples of the world, the new world in which we now live, instead of a place of mastery. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, reading further, as evident principle runs through the whole program as I've outlined. It is the principle of justice to all peoples and nationalities and their right to live on equal terms of liberty and safety with one another, whether they be strong or weak. Unless this principle be made its foundation, no part of the structure of international justice can stand. Further, reading from Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, the moral climax of this, the culminating and final war for human liberty has come. And they are ready to put their own strength, their own highest purpose, their own integrity and devotion to the test. Most important, it is very important, we must refer to this work by Arthur S. Ling and others. They have edited the work, The Papers of Woodrow Wilson. Very important, significant work, and we've got the text of the speech with some important references to there. So therefore, what we see here is, as we analyze Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, let's have a summary. First principle, open diplomacy without secret treaties. How important is it today that we must have trust as the basis of trade? Related to that, economic free trade on the seas during an war and peace. Again, looking at its significance in present times, it is transparency that becomes the foundation of free trade. It is this transparency that leads to mutual linkages and connectivities with reference to trade. And economic free trade on the seas during the war and peace was pointed out by US President Woodrow Wilson. Further, equal trade conditions, that's very important. Again, looking at equal trade conditions pointed out in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, how important it is today. There is a need for parity, there is a need for equality when we look at trade relations too. Fourth, decrease armaments amongst all nations. Fifth, adjust colonial claims. Sixth, evacuation of all Central Powers from Russia and allow it to define its own independence. Seventh, Belgium to be evacuated and restored. 8. Return of Alsace-Lorraine region and all French territories. 9th. Readjust Italian borders. 10th. Austria-Hungary to be provided an opportunity for self-determination. 11th. Redraw the borders of the Balkan region, creating Romania, Serbia, Montenegro. 12th. Creation of a Turkish state with granted free trade in the Dardanelles. 13th. Creation of an independent Polish state. And last 14, creation of League of Nations. Now let's analyze that. Out of the 14 principles, 8 8 of the 14 principles, they treated specific territorial issues like amongst the combat nations. 5 of the other 6 contained general principles for a peaceful world. And some of the examples, for example, principles pertaining to free trade, reduction of armaments, etc. And the 14th point was about the formation of the League of Nations. So what we see here is that as we go through, revise through the 14 points, that is open diplomacy without secret treaties, economic free trade on the seas during war and peace, equal trade conditions, decrease armaments amongst all nations, adjust colonial claims, evacuation of all central powers from Russia and allow it to define its own independence, Belgium to be evacuated and restored, return of Alsace-Lorraine region and all French territories, readjust Italian borders, Austria-Hungary to be provided an opportunity for self-determination, redraw the boundaries of the Balkan region, creating Romania, Serbia and Montenegro, creation of Turkish state with guaranteed free trade in the Dardanelles, creation of an independent Polish state and creation of the League of Nations. Important summary of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So as we look at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, what we see here is that it directly addresses what were understood or what was perceived as the causes for First World War. Further, when we try to look at from the perspective of contemporary global governance issues, issues like the need to have open diplomacy, the need to have trust and transparency with no secret treaties, the need to have equal trade conditions, the need to have economic free trade on the seas during war and peace is of extreme significance to in the present time with respect to looking at issues of trade, equality, parity, justice. It is important that when we talk about First World War and the end of the First World War, Treaty of Westphalia, that was a peace document signed between the Germany and the Allied powers on 28 June 1919. This treaty not only ended the state of war, but that had existed, as we saw that from 1914 to 1918 between Germany and the Allies, again from 1914, and brought the World War I to an end. It's very important, as we discussed Treaty of Versailles, that the treaty gets its name from the Palace of Versailles, where it was signed. So it is important to understand that the very important aspects of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, they are the foundation, they laid the basis for the negotiation of Treaty of Versailles. It is important to understand that yes, the League of Nations, it failed to intervene in many conflicts which led to the Second World War. An important aspect here, as we discussed Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, Treaty of Versailles, and also the aspect of League of Nations, the very absence of United States as a League member, the issue of war guilt clause of Treaty of Versailles, all of them also are important issues that one must understand looking at the fallout, the drawback of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So therefore, at the same time, the 14 points, the Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, they are very significant because ideas, as we know, are indeed of great significance because the 14 points, they presented an important basis for, say for example, international organizations to mediate any future dispute. It showed the way that yes, there can be a world government organization, an international organization to regulate world peace and security. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points also are an important document to be studied, a subject to be analyzed by looking at the idealist perspective in international relations. The idealist perspective that focuses on the cooperative side of international reality. Herein, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points for talking about the need to have economic free trade based on no secrecy, the need to respect each other, the need to have League of Nations, all of it definitely are important case studies while understanding idealism in international relations. Then for the 14 points are also very significant while looking at issue of self-determination for the ethnic population. And most important, when we look at in the present times, they are very important with respect to issues of justice, equity in global governance issues. One must refer to the important work by Jeffrey A. Engels, Richard A. Immerman. It's an edited work with 14 points for the 21st century, a renewed appeal for cooperative internationalism. Very important work, trying to present some important highlights at how 14 points somewhere show a ray of hope when we look at the contemporary times and when we look at cooperative internationalism. Another important work that you must refer to, Woodrow Wilson, Congressional Government, a Study in American Politics. So dear learners, the very important aspect of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, not only with talking about open diplomacy without secret treaties, economic free trade on seas during war and peace, equal trade conditions and readjusting the Italian borders, to the very important aspect of creation of League of Nations. They are very important ideas, not only with reference to situating the idealist perspective, they are not only important ideas with respect to laying the basis for Treaty of Versailles, ending the First World War, but also with respect to important issues concerning international organization, cooperative side of international reality, justice and parity in trade in the contemporary times. We hope the lecture, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, presented to you significant inputs and insights. Dear learners, we look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.